The NFL is finally getting some movement on these second-round rookie contracts. What does it mean for the Dolphins and Jonah Savaiinaea? We're exploring that here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and NFL staff writer for A to Z Sports. Want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today on the show, movement has started. We've seen rookie contracts starting to sign, including some that are in very close proximity to Jonah Savaiinaea. Now, this started on Wednesday night when the San Francisco 49ers, who picked 43rd and took my guy Alfred Collins, gave Alfred Collins a 10% increase in the amount of fully guaranteed money versus last year's 43rd overall pick. Not a fully guaranteed contract. That was 88% at pick number 43. So all of the teams that pick after number 43 now have this new baseline that you could see with Alfred Collins in his contract, which is why you see teams like Detroit and Tate Ratledge and Washington with Trey Amos. You have kind of this cascading waterfall of back end of the second round rookies that are signing their rookie contracts. And everybody's kind of getting excited because we're avoiding the extra distraction. And it goes back to that saying that we've talked about many times on this program, a deadline spur action, right? And rookies have reported across the league this week, with veterans reporting for the vast majority of teams next Tuesday. I'm going down to Miami next Tuesday to partake in Dolphins training camp and make my annual trip down there, which I'm very excited for and appreciative for the Dolphins for the opportunity to come down and spend a little bit of time consuming practices and talking to players and Mike McDaniel and anybody else that I can kind of ask questions and kind of figure out what's different about this year versus last year and the process from this offseason. That's kind of my objective. But I do fully expect Jonah Savaiinaea to be under contract with the Dolphins. Now, how do you get there? It's a little bit more complicated than that. The other big breakthrough that we saw, aside of Alfred Collins, was yesterday, late last night. Seattle agreed to terms with Nick Emmanwori, who was the 35th overall pick. And Seattle, they came up from 52 to 35. So they're in a very similar boat to the Dolphins as we gave up an extra asset. They gave up 82 with 52 to go up to 35 and draft Nick Emmanwori. So this is a team that, based on their actions in the draft, had a lot of conviction in Nick Emmanwori to be their pick. And, of course, 34 and 33 got fully guaranteed contracts when Houston made Jaden Higgins their first draft choice and gave it to him because he was their first draft choice. And Cleveland, who picked at 33 with Carson Schwessinger, didn't really have a choice, where 34 got fully guaranteed, 32 got fully guaranteed. I guess we're given a fully guaranteed contract, right? So the big staring contest has been Emmanwori because he was next in the queue. Would Seattle have conviction and fight the fight? No, they didn't. They gave Nick Emmanwori the fully guaranteed contract as well. So that makes the top three players in the round getting fully guarantees. It's the first time second-round players have ever got fully guaranteed contracts. Pick number 43 got 88%. The other interesting domino that fell came from the AFC East. The Buffalo Bills traded up. They're another team that traded up, and they drafted TJ Sanders for the defensive tackle from South Carolina. And he agreed to terms late last night to sign as well. And he got about 94.7%, 95% of his contract fully guaranteed. So if you have like the draft order with the queue, 33, 34, 35 get 100%. Jonah sits at 37. You obviously have 38, 39, 40, and then 41 got 95%. 43 got 88%. So the jump from 41 to 43 is a sizable gap that would at least give you some inclination of Jonah being several spots in front of that is probably going to fall in the fully guaranteed bucket when it is all said and done. But there's one other piece of this that's at play, and it's the part that probably locks me into my conviction on how I think this ultimately ends from a negotiation standpoint. And even Orr getting a fully guaranteed is obviously a huge domino. The pick at 40 was Tyler Shuck to the New Orleans Saints. As obviously a quarterback. A lot of people across the league have given the inclination that they expect that that's going to be the line in the sand. Let me make sure. I'm checking my phone here. Last thing I want to do is finish a recording and then look down at my phone and Jonah signed. Admin, Dolphins Twitter account admin, I'm begging you, please. Don't drop this in the next 20 minutes. Let me get it up for a few hours if you're going to sign Jonah today, which I know I'm taking a big roll of the dice here. But I feel good and convicted on how this is going to end, and then we have something fun to end the week with before we get to next week, and it's training camp week, and then I hit the road on Tuesday to fly down to Miami for practices next week, which I'm excited for. Shuck being a quarterback and having that positional value in his back pocket, especially now with the pick immediately behind him at 95%, it kind of feels like the Bills drew the line in the sand of, if you're picked after this spot, it ain't going to happen, right? It's not going to happen for you. And then next year, when somebody picks a second-round quarterback, if they pick a quarterback at 48 or 52 or 55, the negotiations with that team and that agent, with that player, with that quarterback is going to say, look, the second-round quarterback last year got a fully guaranteed contract, and then next year, everybody that's picked between wherever the fully guarantees stop this year and wherever that quarterback was picked next year are going to sit here and they're going to have the same staring contest about, well, we're not going to blink because we know if the guy that's picked later is a quarterback and he gets a fully guaranteed contract, then we're going to be in line to get fully guaranteed contracts as well. So this is going to be an annual thing for a couple of years until this process works itself throughout the entirety of the second round. So that's what we have to look forward to next summer. And the Dolphins, let's hope we're picking late, because if we're picking in the middle of the round again, we're going to be having these same, when are they going to sign so-and-so conversations, which I would love to not have. Really, I would love to. But prediction on Jonah Savaiinaea, and then some best and worst outcomes for new faces for the Dolphins this year. That's next here at Locked On Dolphins. Make sure you guys stick with us. Do you ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can be. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you squarely in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over all of your finances. Monarch Money is more than just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. For you, it might be seeing all of your transactions laid out throughout the month and seeing where there's, what's the political term for it? Pork, right? Unnecessary spending, stuff that you don't realize how much it adds up to until you actually stop and add it all up. And if that's the case, you can take control of your finances like I did with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off of your first year. Kind of buried the lead here in the first segment, but I do believe the Dolphins are ultimately going to sign Jonah Savaiinaea to a fully guaranteed contract. I think this dead space that exists now, where it does get a little weird, is the pick before Miami at 36 is the opposite of the positional value conversation. It's a running back. It's also a running back in Quinshon Judkins, who was just arrested last week for assault and domestic violence accusations and charges. So the Cleveland Browns are kind of in this spot where, with all of that unknown based on the early accounts of what he's charged with and what he's accused of, and the fact that he was apprehended, Are you going to give a fully guaranteed contract to Quinshon Judkins? So the Dolphins, from their perspective, the question is beyond the fact that you're haggling over a very small amount of money at this stage, right? 41 got 95% guaranteed. You picked 4 or 5 spots in front of that, right? The writing's on the wall. But do you hold out hope that Cleveland doesn't give a fully guaranteed so that you could then take an incremental decrease off of whatever 36 gets because 36 has off the field problem? It's a possibility, but it's an improbability in my mind. I think Jonah Savaiinaea has booked his ticket for a fully guaranteed contract. And of course, the funny part about all this is the Dolphins weren't scheduled to pick in this range. Right? They had the conviction to go get a player and invest in the offensive line the way that everybody's been asking them for forever. And the way that they're rewarded for it is they end up picking in the limbo zone, the very narrow limbo zone that still exists for first round or for second round draft choices inside the top 40. Even when you win, you lose, right? So my expectation based off of the Bills number with TJ Sanders, even Ori getting fully guaranteed at 35, the proximity to 35, the quarterback dynamic behind you that you're expecting the other shoe to fall, the proximity to fully guaranteed with 41 versus 40, and how much of that's guaranteed. I know this is very big picture league business conversation, but I think all these big picture league business conversations lead to the same road for the Dolphins, which is Jonah Savaiinaea is going to end up signing what I believe is going to be a fully guaranteed contract. And if you could just wait, Miami, till like 4 o'clock, I'm recording a little earlier than I have been to get this out so I get a couple hours. And then if you want to announce that on Friday, like this afternoon, be cool. I'm cool with that. I have no problem with that. But don't drop it in like 20 minutes. Please, I beg you. So let's shift gears here a little bit. And we'll look at the offensive and defensive side of the ball. And I want to look at new names and ask the question, what is the best case and the worst case outcome for some of these new names that we have on the roster this year? Because I think it really becomes interesting. Like Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, right, is brought in with the expectation that he's going to add a physical element to your wide receiver room. He has ability to get down the field and track the football on vertical throws, but he's a much more physical player and a more physical blocker than what the Dolphins have been accustomed to having with their third wide receiver, whether that's Braxton Berrios or River Craycraft or Odell Beckham or even Malik Washington, who I still really like. I think the best case outcome for Westbrook-Ikhine is the Dolphins become much more prominent 11 personnel. And in becoming much more prominent 11 personnel, because they have more faith in their core 5 to block and win blocking structures up front, Westbrook-Ikhine plays meaningful snaps, gets opportunities to be a 50, 60 target guy down the field, maybe continues to have a disproportionate amount of like explosive plays and touchdowns because of his role and his size. But the production would probably, in my mind, look similar to what it did last year for Nick. But you're getting run at probably a 60, 65% clip as far as your personnel usage. I don't think, we still have Alec Ingold. They invested several tight ends. Now, they didn't give big investments to these guys, but they are continuing to kind of needle their way around. What are we going to get at tight end? Right. So I don't think that's super likely. I think the worst case outcome for Nick is he becomes a Mac Hollins type player for you. And that's not meant to be disrespectful for Mac Hollins. Mac Hollins, I want to go back and revisit some of his numbers with Miami. He came to the Dolphins in 2019 and in 2020 and 2021, he was here. He had 25 and 28 targets and had 4 touchdowns and averaged 16 yards a catch in 2021. Now, obviously, the passing wide receiver room that year was not great, but Mac ended up playing meaningful snaps for you. He played 340 snaps for you, and then another almost 300 snaps on special teams. He played 600 snaps on special teams in 2.5 years in Miami. And he was a core special teams guy. But he only had from a receiving standpoint, it was 14 receptions and 16 receptions in 2 full seasons with the Dolphins in 2020 and 2021. So I think that's the upper and lower bands of what healthy role for Nick Westbrook-Ikhine looks like in my mind, which is not a super bad place to be. As far as Darren Waller, I think your worst case scenario is that he's flames out. His reignited passion for football flames out quickly. And it is looking increasingly based on the salary cap tools that are available and have a chance to kind of look at some of the numbers for these contracts, that there was no signing bonus. There's no guaranteed money that's become apparent, and maybe that will change. But as of right now, I look at Darren Waller and I say your worst case scenario for Darren Waller is he flames out throughout training camp. He doesn't look anything like the player that he was, regardless of how well he runs routes on air, and he doesn't make the roster. Like, I think that is within the spectrum of, it's in the lower band spectrum, but it's within the spectrum of possibilities that I think the Dolphins could see. Do I think you're going to get 1,300-yard Darren Waller? No. But if you told me he caught 35, 40 balls for 400, 450 yards and 3, 4, 5 touchdowns, I think that's probably where I would set my upper band expectations for Darren Waller. And I think even if you saw that amount of production from Waller, I would guess it comes at the expense of something else went wrong for somebody else somewhere within the skill group. Let's do James Daniels, and then we'll go to break, and then we'll do the defensive side of the ball. For James Daniels, I think the lower band of outcomes for me firmly lies in not being ready to play at the start of the season. And I don't believe that is going to be the case based off of what I've heard and what James Daniels was partaking in OTAs and minicamp and doing individual drills, but being involved with the team for individual drills. I'll be very interested to see if the Dolphins ultimately put him on the PUP to start training camp. And reminder for the way that this works, PUP is short for physically unable to perform. It could be based off of football injuries from last year, rehab, recovery, whatever. Once you're put on there's an active PUP and a reserve PUP. The PUP you don't want to go on is the reserve PUP because then you can't count against the 90-man roster anymore. If you're on the active PUP, you can be activated at any time. Anytime. Like, you could be put on PUP when the team reports to camp on Tuesday and then be activated and practice on Thursday. Like, it can happen like that. That window is going to be really interesting to me to kind of determine the upper and lower bands. But if Daniels doesn't start on PUP, I think you're already on track for one of the higher outcome bands. If he does start on the PUP, how long does it last? If you stay on the PUP all throughout training camp, then you get reverted when you cut to 53 to the reserve PUP, and then you have to miss the first 4 games of the season. Do I think that's where we're headed with James Daniels? No, I don't. But it does have to be acknowledged. And I do think for Daniels, getting your feet back under you, literally and figuratively, and doing so in a new offense, I think you probably will not see the best version of him early in the year. Now, the good news is I think a not best version of James Daniels is still an upgrade over what you had to go last year. So I think your lower bands and lower outcomes for James is starting the season on PUP. I don't expect that to be the case. The best case scenario is he's full go, full board right away, and the team has no qualms with him being an active participant, kind of like what happened with Jalen Phillips last year. Remember, for going into 2024, Phillips was generally a participant all throughout training camp. And he tore his Achilles later in 2023 than what James Daniels tore his Achilles in 2024. So that's kind of where I sit on that. We're going to go to the defensive side of the ball, some of the newcomers here. That is next here on Locked on Dolphins. Make sure you guys stick with us. I'm trying to decide where to start. We'll probably do Minkah. Probably do Minkah Fitzpatrick first. The upper band scenarios for Minkah Fitzpatrick is seeing a player who is not asked to play so far off the line of scrimmage as frequently, and that moving him around, but not moving him in the way that Brian Flores wanted to move him, will allow him to be more present around the football, make more splash plays. I think that's the ticket for you. Between him and Melifonwu, you have two guys that have a lot of versatility. I think the lower bands of outcomes for Minkah is everybody's worst fear, because 6 years ago he didn't want to be here because the team wanted him to be Patrick Chung and had a really bad roster. He's still not over it, right? And then he comes in with kind of a skeptical attitude. Doesn't sound like that's going to be the case. I expect us to hear from Minkah quite early next week. I don't personally read anything into Minkah didn't post anything since getting traded. He's made like one Twitter post in 2 freaking years. And the team doesn't have press conferences when they're not convened in the building. So I don't read anything into not hearing from Minkah. I think he made one Instagram post this summer, and that was it. And it was back in like the beginning of June. He's not an online person. He's not perpetually online. But I do think that is your lower band outcomes is what everybody's afraid of there ends up being a reality. I just don't think that's going to be the case. For speaking of Melifonwu, the lower bands here is another guy who looks really promising, and in the first month of the season gets banged up and has to miss extended time. I do think the upper bands for Melifonwu looks like what the 2023 tape looked like, but I am interested in how that ends up playing itself out, because he has not been a guy who's ever played heavy workloads. Now, he's played in a lot of games in 2023, but he's not somebody who was relied upon and called upon to be a 1,000 snap guy. You know, he played 400 snaps in 2023, but he played in 17 games, and then he played 180 snaps on special teams. So he gave you almost 600 total snaps. If the Dolphins can get 600 snaps on defense for Melifonwu, I think that would be a win. But I think the durability element here is certainly 10 games played, 7 games played, 3 games played, 3 games started. I think you just have to be realistic that if you're expecting Melifonwu to play 1,000 snaps, you'll have hit the jackpot if that happens, which is why I think the depth at safety is so important with Ashton Davis and the 2 young guys, Elijah Campbell. I don't know how they're going to sort out those 6 guys. That is going to be a brutal cut decision to have to make between Minkah, Melifonwu, Ashton Davis. And both Ashton Davis and Melifonwu got a decent amount of guaranteed money. And obviously, Minkah being the primary asset coming back in the Ramsey deal, you'd expect he's going to be here. 2 guys on rookie contracts are the kinds of guys that you want to hang on to because of cost control year over year. And then Elijah Campbell's been a reliable special teams guy for you, who's been the guy that they seem to have liked the last couple of years as the third safety. Good luck. Maybe you keep 4 corners and keep 6 safeties. I don't know. At linebacker, I'll go Willie Gay. You have New Orleans Willie Gay, and then you have Kansas City Willie Gay. And that is the range of outcomes. New Orleans Willie Gay, and God bless him, the Saints played him on the edge a whole bunch last year. Very apparent that's not where he's built to succeed. Don't do that, Anthony Weaver, and I don't think he will. But if you told me you're going to get some third down package type stuff and Willie Gay's going to be out there and he's going to do some of the shallow spy stuff or maybe be a pressure player from inside gaps, I can dig it. And then the question quarterbacks have to process is if, well, he's out there, he's probably going to come. If he's going to come, who's dropping amongst the other guys that's on the line of scrimmage? Or maybe he's going to be the guy that just plays the shallow underneath and tries to buzz and take the hot throws, and they're going to bring the other guy. Like, you could do some chess match stuff with Willie Gay. Do not play him on the edge and ask him to be an outside linebacker as a pass rush player like the Saints did. It's asinine. It's I got other adjectives I want to use, and they're all not appropriate for the Tegna Locked On platform. So I'll leave it at that. Let's go with Kenneth Grant. Last name here. Best and worst case outcomes for Kenneth Grant. The best case outcome for Kenneth Grant is he doesn't need the Chop Robinson first half of first year window to really click into place. I think with his size, I think with his point of attack skills, I think with his athleticism, he's a player who I have very high expectations. The difference from him and Mozzie Smith, who was the other defensive tackle from Michigan a couple years ago that went Dallas took him, and they have not gotten a good ROI on that pick. Mozzie was a nose, and Dallas cut him down, and he cut down weight to try to be a penetration player. Kenneth plays at the weight that he plays and still has the penetration ability. So Dallas took a guy and tried to turn him into what he wasn't. I think Miami already has what Dallas wanted to turn Mozzie into. I think Kenneth Grant is already those things. I think the lower bands is struggles with leverage at the point of attack with consistency, and the pass rush plan's not great. So he becomes kind of a cleanup guy. But I think bad outcome Kenneth Grant, I think is still a better outcome than good outcome Benito Jones. So I think you're better in that sense. The question, of course, will be which one of these ends up on the high end of the spectrum and the low end of the spectrum, and what does that mean for the team's forecast and outlook? And it's a really interesting year. I'm not going to sit here and dispute. And if you're pessimistic about it, I get why you're pessimistic about it. If you're optimistic about it, I get why you're optimistic about it. It's going to be a lot of non-controllables in coaching are going to be the things that decide this fork in the road that we are at as a football team and as a fan base, which way it's going to fork. That's going to do it for us here today on the show. I'm going to try to get this up before Jonah Savaiinaea inevitably signs and renders the first 15 minutes of this program moot. So I'm going to get on that. You get on enjoying the rest of your weekend, and I'll be back to talk to you all again on Monday. Go Fins.